Hello and welcome to the cleanup tutorial for Maya 2016 for Pipelines 281. When people hand in their assignments, you need to make sure that you go down kind of a checklist of things because for all intents and purposes, handing in a model that looks good on the 3D viewing screen does not necessarily mean that it is completely and thoroughly checked. So let's go through the process of finding out how to clean this object up and making sure that this is ready to hand in. First of all, you need to make sure that you don't assume that everything you see on the screen is perfect just because it looks like it's one mesh. In fact, in this case, there's something that's hidden inside this evil Pikachu head. And the best way to view everything is to bring up the outliner. Not only do we see that this little cube has been hidden in there and we don't need the cube, but we also see that there's a hidden object. And it's only selectable here in the outliner because on the screen it's invisible. You can click it in the outliner and then change the visibility to on if you want to see what it is. He has a brother, and then you can delete that as well. The next thing you want to do is make sure that you have things sized correctly. The phantasm ball was more or less taken care of because in the tutorial itself you were able to set up the settings. So make sure first of all everything is at size. You go to Windows, go down to Settings and Preferences, go to Preferences. Also, although it's currently off the screen, you should be able to click on this little character here running away from the gear sun, and it should come up the same way. So under the Settings and Preferences, you want to make sure that you first have everything set to the size you need, and that'll be determined by going up about halfway down this left-hand column and clicking on Settings. Usually we want to do feet, go from centimeters to feet, and also film 24 seconds. I prefer to have NTSC 30. It's just sort of a animator thing. Save it like that. That's the first step. Now we know that we're actually dealing in feet in each of these gray boxes here, although probably very hard to see on the video, are 1 foot long. However, we have not checked how far the grid goes, and in perspective you can see this one kind of goes on forever. The next step is to come up to Windows and make sure that you come down to, to Display. In fact, I'm going to move my Maya down here a bit. Click on Display and go to Grid and go to the options for it. In Grid Options, just type in 10, 1, and then 1. Apply. Now we have a much more reasonably sized grid, and you can also kind of suss just how big your object is. You can bring it back holding down the X key when you translate it to snap to the middle of the grid, or simply zero everything out up here. And the next thing you want to check, pressing F and getting really close, is whether or not your normals are reversed. In this one I've intentionally sort of messed with this. And you can check your normals by coming down to the shading menu and going down to backface culling. If you turn on backface culling, the normals that are not facing you are automatically not drawn. So it's a nice way to kind of tell, well, now wait a minute, that's not what I ordered. Especially if in face mode you're still able to select that face. That means it does exist, but you have merely reversed your normals. And this should be pretty obvious on sections of your car or your prop or whatever. So with backface culling on, you should be able to see any suspicious flipping, and if you turn it off, you suddenly should see it, although probably colored black like these are. And the way you can fix it is you go into the modeling mode in Maya, come up here to Mesh Display, and under the Normals part of the menu, go down and then you can reverse it. So I've grabbed all three of the normals that are currently reversed. I then use the command reverse, and everything should be sorted from there. So the normals are set, the size is set. We need to check our shaders. Most people make the mistake, as I did, of just grabbing, you may have noticed that the other objects in this scene, the tiny cube, as well as the duplicate Pikachu head, had different shaders on them. And you want to come up here to Rendering Editors, go down to Hypershade, and bring up your Hypershade to make sure that you've gotten rid of everything that no longer is relevant. In other words, there's this shader, another shader, and yet another shader. So this one is the one I'm currently using for the mesh, and I'm going to rename it. So Pikachu shader. I like to use the name of what it is, and then underscore the media of what it is. So when I rename the shader, Pikachu underscore shader, here's a little trick. You can actually Control C, cut, copy, and then come in here to the mesh, selecting the mesh, double click on the name, paste it, and replace the word shader with mesh. So now you have two things that are named exactly as they should be. You can validate this in the outliner. We are renaming not just the mesh to what it should be, and there is one singular mesh here. We've also renamed the shader, and there are several shaders because we deleted the objects that these belong to, but they yet remain in Maya because you do not automatically delete the shaders when you simply hit the delete button. For that, you need to come up here to File and go down to Optimize Scene Size. The scene size, of course, is just going to clean up any of these orphaned processes. And when I hit it, it comes up asking, are you absolutely sure? Because there's a whole multitude of things if you go into the options that it will clean up for you. And frankly, I think the default setting is just fine. Maya tends to have what it needs cleaned up in every scene already clicked on. If you want to be excessive, you can click on locators. Just be careful because you can be ruining more things than you intend. However, watch these shaders disappear when we hit apply. And boom. So we're left with one shader. We're left with one mesh. I'm now able to size this appropriately since I know that this background is exactly 1 foot. If you are building something that is 3 feet high or 10 feet across, you can come in here to the orthographic views and gauge it just by seeing how big it is and then counting the squares. In this case, I've made a 6 foot high and 6 foot across evil Pikachu head, and that's perfect. If it is something that tends to rest on the ground like a car, you want to put the tires kind of on the ground level here. And at this point, you can see all the manipulations that we've been through on the far right, and we don't want that to be saved. So we come to one of the final steps, and that is that you come up here to modify and then pop down to freeze transformations, go into the options for it, and check that you have everything selected. Translate, rotate, scale. Again, that should be the default setup for when you simply come up here and hit reset settings. These will zero out when I hit freeze transform or apply. Whenever you click on apply, of course, the window stays up. If you hit free transform, the window disappears. I don't need to keep it up, so boom, made it disappear. So now this has been frozen at the right size, and I have the grid at the right size. I have my world units at the right size. There is a slight bit of weirdness here when I popped those normals. You can see kind of the hard edge of these. So I want to clean that up a little further, and I'm going to come into mesh display, come down to soften edge, and it softens the edges. You need to be very careful about this because there may be some places you want hard edges. You can see the dark shadows pooling around the ear stalk. And in this case, I may want to click on the edges around one. This is, of course, up to you whether or not you want a certain look. I've also made these triangles non-planar. So I'm going to not only, under Mesh Display, harden that edge. I'm going to come in and select these faces, all 4 of them, and come up here to Mesh Triangulate, and it will triangulate just the meshes in question. Now, remember, if you use an automated process, the computer will make an unartistic choice for you. And if you notice the different ways that this has been solved, from a distance, it kind of looks like everything is solved nicely. But in fact, when you get up close and personal, you notice, well, actually, there's a different effect here. So really what you want to do in this case is kind of make all the choices yourself. I prefer to use the multi-cut tool, where I can come in, make an edge from the corner to the top, and just repeat this for all the little quads here that were not sorted. And be very careful because you can go and accidentally create some very odd polygon cuts. But in this case, I am getting rid of not just n-gons, but also really wildly shaped different non-planar polygons. Now that, if I wanted to be, if I'm going to be thorough, I would do the same process to the other side. I'm going to be looking at these black areas that are, again, pooling the sort of darkness, because when I cut the edge, it may have messed with the normals a bit. So I'm coming in here to harden out this base, and it should help make everything a little, get rid of those pooling black edges. Also, grabbing those edges, I can come up to Mesh Display, and I can harden those edges so things are a little sharper now, and I no longer have those pooling black parts of the mesh. If I wanted to, I could also smooth out the normal in the middle here, but again, that can go on. You kind of get the idea of what it is that I'm doing. So let's move on to some of the last steps, which is that you need to make sure there's absolutely no history. As we've been modifying this character, history has been building up here on the right, and so the last step you want to do is you want to come up here to delete all by type, not delete by type, which will just erase the history for the selected object. I understand we only have one object now, but just to be positive that you're doing it to the entire scene, go to the next one down, delete all by type history, and all the history should be gone. At this point, you can come up here and save as a Maya ASCII file, not a Maya binary, and make sure that you've saved it with your name and all the, make sure it's in the right folder. So there you are. That's the basic cleanup for your objects, making sure that they're all at size, making sure your world is at size. And if you have any questions, let me know.